This is the Freewell wide and anamorphic lens, and one of the coolest things is that they also include ND filters that clip to the front, so you can keep your shutter speed at the right level for video and get the proper amount of motion blur. Hey, my name's Jake and I create content here to help solo creators on the go. So I test and review lots of drones, cameras, lenses in places like this here in Alaska, and I give you tips and tutorials on how to use them. Today we're testing the anamorphic and wide filter from Freewell with the ND filters that they include in the kit. But first, we're going to jump in with the standard Mavic 3 lens and ND filters and get some shots and some photos, and then we'll grab some with the wide and the anamorphic and figure out why you might want to use a wide lens or an anamorphic lens on a drone as opposed to just using the regular lens that comes with the drone. So we'll get some shots here, obviously, in a beautiful location. Disclaimer, Freewell sent these to me, but they don't get any input into this video. They're not paying me beyond that they sent me these ND filters, and they don't get to see this video before it's launched, so take that for what you will. First thing I want to do is get a really low flying shot over some of this gravel bar area and kind of give you an idea of what it feels like with the motion and the speed of flying low over something. One thing that's really helpful for getting the feeling of motion is obviously being close to stuff. But having a wider lens, like this, the regular standard Mavic lens here with the wide angle lens, you get a lot more feeling of motion and movement and just the speed, because the wider the lens goes, the more you see stuff ripping by, and the distortion factor that happens out toward the edges of a wide angle lens gives you a feeling of stuff moving by much faster than it actually is. So if you're wanting to get a lot of motion, a lot of feeling, flying low, but also flying and using a wide angle lens like this wide angle lens from Freewell will give you a lot more feeling of movement and motion and speed when you're flying close to stuff. And the same thing applies when you're doing an orbit, a real low orbit of somebody or something. You just get a lot of feeling of motion and movement when you're real low to a subject, just like this here. And now you can see here's the orbit with the wide angle lens. It just gives you a lot more. I'm flying in the same area, I'm flying the same speed, I'm flying about the same flight path, or at least as close as I could get to it. I know because I had a lot of little trees and branches to give me a good marker. But you can see that it just gives you a completely different feeling. Not only does it push your subject back in the frame or further away, and of course let it a lot more information, but it definitely gives you the feeling of a lot more movement, especially in the foreground. Maybe not quite so much in the background, but the foreground definitely feels like it's moving a lot faster. So one thing you might notice too, there are a lot of times when you want to take a photo of something, but you can't get high enough because of maybe you can't fly over 400 feet or above 400 feet or something. So I'm at 300 feet right now, but just for the sake of this, I get a lot of small aircraft that fly through here. So I'm gonna snap a photo of this blue sinkhole here in the water. I'm gonna just center it up a little bit. And now you see with the regular lens, this is a blue sinkhole, and then when we switch to the wide angle lens, there's quite a bit of difference. So there's a photo, same height, same place. There's one thing I noticed in photo mode that we'll talk about in a minute with the ND filters and the wide lens. We'll talk about that in a minute. That's a little bit of a downside, but if you're mostly doing photos, it's not a big deal. Now, we're gonna test out the anamorphic filter. Now, anamorphic filters, anamorphic lenses, period, are very stylized things. So you might like them, you might not. Cool thing is, it comes as part of the kit. It works just like the others. You have to de-squeeze it in post. Now, this doesn't have a lot of squeeze. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but I think it's like 1.2-ish. Anyway, it'll be linked right down here so you can see. But it just gives you a little bit of a different look, a little bit of a different flavor. And in the case of like being out here, you can't really see like the lens flares that make anamorphic kind of what anamorphic is known for. We'll see what we can get, but it does give you just sort of this wider, more cinematic feeling footage than just a regular drone look. The cool thing about both these lenses is the telephoto lens, the telephoto camera on the Mavic 3 still works. There's no obstruction, so you can still use that without worrying about it. Even with the ND filters on, it doesn't obstruct the view of the telephoto camera at all, which is great. They just pop on and pop off just like the regular ND filter. It's on there. So it snaps on just like everything else, moves just like the other one. Great, no obstruction of movement. And then we'll grab the ND32 and they just clip on the front. Like they have little clips on each side. Make sure that's nice and secure. Obviously, we don't want this falling off. There are a couple of things you need to be aware of using these lenses and the ND filters. One is that there are some like weird reflections in photo mode and some vignetting in photo mode, not in video mode. I haven't seen it in video mode at all, but in photo mode, there are some weird little reflections and some vignetting that happens with the ND filters. You take the ND filters off, it's fine. You just have to adjust your shutter speed. But if you're shooting video, then I definitely recommend using the ND filters to get the proper amount of motion blur. If you want to know about ND filters and motion blur, click or tap right here, put together a whole video about it. It'll walk you through why you want to keep your motion blur, your shutter speed, and your frame rate set to certain settings. So now I'm traveling for work, and one thing I wanted to note is actually there's a lot less vignetting than I originally thought. Part of that was due to me not installing the ND filter quite correctly. It actually snapped on a little further than I realized when I was doing my original work with the ND filters. There's a little bit of vignetting in both video and photo modes, but it's significantly less than some of the clips you see here. So here are some other shots that you can see where you can see a little bit more of the difference. Another thing to be aware of is that using these lenses and the ND filters, although not so much the ND filters, does affect the white balance. So you need to change your white balance accordingly. It's not a lot, a couple hundred Kelvin, 200-300, depending on the situation you're shooting in. But do be aware that the coating on these lenses, you've got to adjust your white balance a little bit just to make sure that you're set properly and everything looks right. And one more thing, because I'm traveling, I had the opportunity here to test the wide from Freewell against the wide from DJI, and you can see the differences between those two lenses here. The difference in field of view, not as big as I thought there would be. There definitely is a little bit. But the other thing is that if you're going to film video at all with the wide lens and you need to keep your shutter speed set where it needs to be, then the only option really is the Freewell wide lens, which I think is a great option considering the price difference. $199 for the Freewell kit, which comes with 4 ND filters, the wide and the anamorphic lens. $179 for the DJI wide lens. It makes it a very compelling option to be able to give yourself a lot of different options when you're out filming. This is the set you get. This is the kit you get. Comes in this nice little box here. You've got the ND8, ND16, ND32, and ND64, and then the wide lens and the anamorphic lens. Nice little magnetic closing clip. And I leave a cleaning cloth in here because these ND filters are so small around the edges, which is good. They need to be lightweight, but I tend to get a little bit of fingerprints on them. But leaving a little cleaning cloth in there makes it easy. And then this whole thing packs nicely in my camera bag or in my case with my Mavic 3. If you want to learn more about how to improve your drone videos or photos, click or tap right there. I put together a playlist. I'll see you in one of those videos. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below or join my live stream Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.